Greetings and aloha, everybody out there. Welcome to another edition of the official Ronnie Landis podcast show, formerly known as the Holistic Human Optimization Show. Those are both one and the same. We don't need to get into that at the moment, though. As you know, if you're listening to this, whether Facebook Live or particularly on the podcast platform, I've been doing a special COVID-19 pandemic perceptual crisis interview series with some of the greatest minds that I've been able to pull together, and particularly people that I've interviewed. And in some cases, I've interviewed 2 or 3 times in the past for the official podcast. We had a completely different plan before all this happened with the podcast, but I really wanted to make it a point to serve people and support people exactly where they're at, where we're all at, which is we're in this shared experience right now. Most likely we're in our homes and we're just navigating the waters of turbulence and uncertainty. And that's why I really wanted to bring some incredible minds that I greatly admire and respect to help us provide insight and perspective that can help us thrive through these times. So with that said, I have one of those individuals on with me. This individual is Richard Rudd. He is really the founder, the creator, the conduit for the famous work, The Gene Keys. And I've interviewed him 3 times, twice individually, and we had a third really interesting episode with another friend, Nick Good. So if you haven't heard those, please go back over those after this conversation. But this is a unique one. We're both sitting in a situation we did not expect, as you and I, Richard, we just kind of came on here and just started laughing at the irony or just the obviousness of, whatever this is, which is also what I want to get your perspective on. What do you feel this is? That's obviously a question up in the air for people. Psychologically, emotionally, and particularly spiritually. And I think you have a spiritual perspective that is very unique and probably many others. So without further ado, Richard, welcome back on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ronnie. It's great to be here and looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, well, let's just jump right in. So, it's almost difficult to know exactly how to start or what question to ask. So I'm just gonna go with this. What is your pulse right now? We've obviously been in this quarantine situation for about a month now as a global community. As a global community, for the first time in our humanity's history that I'm aware of, we are all having a synonymous experience. Generally speaking, obviously everyone's having an individual experience, which is dramatically different. Where you live, where you're at, different laws and policies, different governing agencies, domestic situations that are different from your neighbor next to you. Maybe you're in a relationship that actually maybe is not serving you and now it's getting amplified. Whatever the case is, it's a very strange time to say the least. So Richard, can you just lead us into maybe your perspective on just what I said and what kind of is coming up for you right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not as surprised as some people because as you know, I'm the founder of the Gene Key system and big synthesis, and I wrote this great big book back in 2009 and called The Gene Keys. And when I wrote that book, I was kind of blown away because I was right in the middle of it. And the Gene Keys are these 64 codes of consciousness upon which the universe is built. So it's a universal code for everything, basically. And anyway, I came to this one Gene Key, this one code, the 55th one. And I wasn't doing them in order. I was doing them intuitively. And when I came to write that one, it was like opening up an envelope. Each one of these opened up an envelope and then it kind of just exploded, that particular one. And contained inside it as a transmission of wisdom, which is what the Gene Keys are, was this prophecy, and it was more than just it wasn't like this is going to happen, or it was like this prophetic imprint that then kind of breathed itself into the entire work. So that one expanded out, is like 5 times the length of all the others as I wrote the book, and then it breathed itself into all my works and all the things I've been doing ever since. And it speaks of this time that we're living in as the great change. And so I have been speaking about this for some time, and I think we spoke about it in our past interviews, because it's a part of everything that I'm involved with and everything that the world is currently going through. It was just a matter of like, how is this going to be triggered? You know, because there were already signs and tremors and you know, that there's something big coming. There's an anticipation in the air that we can't keep living like this. And in fact, if you ask any systems analyst who really understands has a global view of systems generally, how systems operate, they will tell you that the growth of consciousness in any system moves through these phases. And one of the phases is that when life proliferates or it over proliferates, then there's always a mechanism built into the system that causes a cutback or a dieback, you know, so that there has to be, in order for the system to transcend itself and move to another level or dimension in terms of evolution, there has to be this built-in program that kind of creates the decline, in a way, of the old structure in order that the next dimension can come through. And that's sort of, I mean, that's imprinted in life anyway, isn't it? Because we see it in nature. And if we look at our evolution as a species, then we see it again. You can look back a long way. You can see how hominids have like evolved. And what's interesting, what geneticists now know, and evolutionary geneticists, is that the biggest shifts in terms of the consciousness of life as we know it on this planet always come suddenly. You know, it's just one of those things. Like 80% of mutations in DNA have arrived suddenly. Like there's a whole hypothesis called the Red Queen hypothesis, and it's based on this process. Like, yes, things change gradually over long periods of time, but the biggest things happen quickly. And so that's
like a quantum leap. Yeah,
exactly. And so most shifts happen suddenly, whether it's an asteroid impact creating it or it's some natural event that, you know, that's how life kind of makes its breakthroughs and breakdowns. So in a way, we are in the process of I would say at the beginning of one of those events, of which I call the Great Change. And I think it's like we're just at the very beginning of it, really. So what we're seeing now is it's probably just, you know, the early, you know, it's maybe the first veil being removed. If you can imagine, maybe there's 7 veils, you know, like this is the first veil being pulled off our reality. And others will come off. But it's like as the first veil is removed, we're given some time for the theater to play out, for the drama to play out, for us to kind of experience, well, what happens when that veil is removed over reality and we're faced with, you know, who we are really and what we've done and how far we've come and all of that. So yeah, I think that's where we've got to. We've got to that stage of the beginning of the removing of the veils over reality.
Yeah. I think that's extremely eloquent and very, very well put. And so with that, and to that point, I find, well, there's a lot that I find interesting. One of the things that I've found very interesting and has caused me to go down a number of, you know, I have my own passport to the rabbit holes, right? I got my own passport, my frequent flyer miles. I'm no stranger to the bottomless rabbit holes. I've been predisposed to it for a long time. But one of the things that I was very, I guess you could just say it's interesting when this whole virus scenario arose, and then you saw just the escalation of everything ramping up with social distancing, all these policies, all this whole kind of reality being shifted so dramatically. All of a sudden on the internet, there's a voluminous amount of information that, let's just call it conspiratorial information, but very specific information coming from so many different areas, all arising at the same time. Now, we don't have to go into the information itself. I just want to talk about the phenomenon itself, because the timing is uncanny. And, you know, and again, I don't need to go into the information or go into that particular aspect. I just want to bring up this aspect that you talked about, which is the veil, the veil number one. If we're going to use that model, that's a pretty interesting model. Veil number one coming up, and then kind of shaking up the fish tank and the muck kind of coming up and showing us how dirty the water really was underneath the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're seeing. You know, I mean, you know, I take the kind of global, I mean, the cosmic view, because the work I do with Gene Keys is about patterns, and so I look at these great sweeping patterns, and I'm a lover of patterns in terms of looking at the fractal patterns of evolution, and you can look at lots of different ways where you can track patterns. And yeah, one of them that I really enjoy is from the Indian Vedas, you know, this idea of the yugas, these great spans of time, these rounds, these evolutionary rounds. And one of the things that happens in those understandings is that when a civilization shifts from one entire epoch to another, there's always some kind of cataclysmic shift, the change. And the other thing that comes is that you can never fully envisage what's coming. You know, it's a break with the continuity of what has been. So everything we are conjecturing now, you know, whether it's a conspiracy of this, that, or the other, we are looking from this worldview at something that we can't possibly imagine. This is why in Gene Keys, in all my works and stuff, and on my books and things, you see this little symbol of the little dragonfly. And the dragonfly is a lovely symbol. I think I've told that before in one of the interviews, that, you know, the life of the dragonfly is a perfect metaphor for where we are now, because the dragonfly lives underwater for 2 or 3 years, where it's a very successful predator. And then after 2 or 3 years living as a predator, it one day does something completely out of character that it's never done before. It climbs a stalk of grass or a reed out of the water environment where it lives and into the sunlight and the fresh air. And it's never done that before. And as it's clinging to this stalk of grass, the sun starts to work on it, and it starts to create this mutation that's been hiding inside it. And then the back opens up and it cracks and it splits open, and then the thorax uncurls and the wings slowly unfurl. And it's the water element that actually creates this process. So it's the water inside its body that creates a hydraulic pressure that opens and unfurls the wings. And then there's this new creature sitting there on a reed, and then a puff of wind comes along and it takes to the air. So it moves from an underwater predator to this iridescent, incredible creature of the air, you know, that has no resemblance to the previous life. And it didn't know that that was inside it, you know, it just surrendered and it happened. And so I think it's a great metaphor, because from where we sit, we cannot envisage where we're going. And I think that's really important. It's like the great change. We don't really know how it's going to happen. We just know it is happening. And that humanity itself is about to kind of give birth to a new type of itself, a new mutation in its actual DNA. So we're changing from the inside. You know, we kind of think it's on the outside. We think it's all on the outside, but the outside is just a reflection of what is changing on the inside. So we're shifting from the inside. That's what the most important thing is, in our DNA. That's why my system's called Gene Keys, because it's like it's in our DNA. It's moving from the inside, and then the outside just reflects it. So you can focus on what's going on out there, and it could be very frightening to do that. But if you focus on what's going on inside you, inside who you are, then you come into contact with the real truth, with the real essence of these times. And I just want to say that it's all very easy for me to say all these things. And I'm really aware that out in the world, there's a huge amount of suffering going on. There always has been, actually, but we're much more aware of it than we've ever been before.
Right.
And we're much more aware of our acute fear of death than we ever have been before as a whole species, because we are we're reacting to that fear, you know, and we're right to in one level, because we're humans, and we should, you know, we should be trying our best to help people who are suffering, of course. And yet, so we have to hold both these poles. One, people are really suffering, and there are heroes and heroines out there doing that incredible work, helping those, and those people who are suffering are being heroic as well. And all the, you know, that everything is like, it's intense. And on the other side, there's this spiritual rebirth. So there's a very human and a very spiritual aspect, and we have to hold both those poles. That's a real edge, you know, for anyone who's kind of in this process of awakening, like holding that edge. It's like the dragonfly up the stalk, you know, it's like it's clinging on to the old way. Yeah. And as it's clinging on, this new part is being born at the same time. And you have to kind of honor both sides. Yeah.
Extremely well put. That lands really well. And that brings up a number of things, but I'll digress from a few of them. But the one thing you said that I think is really pertinent is this principle of the holographic mirror, right? And it's an interesting thing to bring up, because in more spiritual, metaphysicalized circles and conversations, this is a very common thing. Even the observer effect from quantum physics, these ideas and concepts, in times of comfort, let's say, basically any time prior to this one, you know, I don't even go down the rabbit hole of all the times that have been slightly uncomfortable as a civilization. We can name many, but let's just say before this thing happened, and people's fear and threat detection was triggered to the degree that it is now, a lot of these ideas were more concepts, right, for a lot of people. But now is the time where these ideas, the spiritual principles, all the fruits of the labor, whether that was all the medicine ceremonies somebody did. I know for myself, I'm kind of like, okay, what was the value of all that now? Where are the abilities, the wisdom, the talents that was gained from all that work? Where is it now? Because now is where it counts. Where is my belief system at right now? Because now it's time to really see the value of my philosophy. In other words, it's time to see the value of all the work and research that I've been doing up to this point in real time when it's most needed. So I just wanted to share that, get your thoughts on that as well. But this idea that our reaction, our internal reaction and response is actually where we need to place our attention. And it's whatever we're seeing and whatever we're interpreting from the world out there is actually a mirror to let us know where we really are internally at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's true, Ronnie. I think the other element to this is again, looking at it from a systems perspective, when a new form is being born out of an old form, then there's a huge amount of letting go and surrendering of fear. So there's a big transformational process for us as individuals, as relationships, families, communities, and as a whole humanity, as a society. There's transformation in every one of those levels of the hologram. But of course, it starts with us as an individual, you know, and I'm like you, I'm sitting at home right now, surrounded by my family, you know, and I've got 2 teenagers at home, you know, a little bit kind of confused and, you know, a bit bored and lost and frustrated and all of those things. And, you know, so I'm like handling that as best I can as a father, and supporting them and carrying on doing what I'm doing. But it's very challenging. You know, this time tests our mettle, you know, it tests like how embodied we are in these higher spiritual concepts that many of us have been exploring for decades, maybe. And so it's a really good test of like, how much can you live it? You know, how can you hold these poles inside you of like, yes, there's suffering, and yes, there's something amazing being born in this. And there's trauma, you know, inside us. There's trauma inside every one of us. And a trigger event like this will tend to bring up some of the layers of that trauma, you know. I don't know, for me, sometimes it'll come up in the night, you know, or early in the morning, and it just sort of rises up, and there it is in the body. And then you kind of have to just love yourself through it, or parent yourself through it, and you know, do your practices that allow you to transmute it, and then it will transmute. It will, you know. If you're doing your practices, whatever they are, whether they're meditation or prayer or, you know, the yoga or whatever techniques you have developed over times, and in Gene Keys I offer many, but it's above all, it's the kind of most important is the reassurance that we give ourselves, like this is safe, even if it feels unsafe. This is safe to feel this. It's even safe to feel fear. Which I know seems like a paradox. Like, but you know, it's like if you're listening to this and you feel fear or trauma coming up, tell yourself, this fear is safe, you know, and that sentence alone can really enable you to allow that fear to move through your system, to allow the trauma to pass through instead of get stuck.
Right.
And because then you get into a kind of mind, you know, a minefield, you know, or a mind loop where you're kind of feeling trapped, or you feel anxious, anxiety builds in the system. And, you know, so that's the most important thing. I would say, I keep reiterating this to people, is like really, really important is to be gentle with ourselves at this period, you know, because if trauma is coming up in us, it's like from our childhood, you know, fears, deep fears from our childhood, from maybe very early childhood, often is the case. And these patterns get triggered in us because there's threat. There's the threat outside of insecurity. And that's when those things get triggered. So it's really important to parent ourselves like a little, you know, there's a little baby inside us that just is like reacting. And if we can really gently hold ourselves and be patient, those feelings will move through. They will shift. It won't take longer than a day in most cases, and then and in many cases quite a lot less. You know, it depends on how compassionate we are with ourselves, and then it shifts. And then I don't know if you experience that in this period, but yeah. So I think it's the same for many of us. And of course, it also builds pressure in relationships. That's another story. If we're, you know, it puts that. So I mean, if you can be gentle with yourself as an individual, then, and compassionate towards yourself and forgiving towards yourself, that is going to already change all your relationships for the better. So whatever tension would have built out of that fear or trauma, you've disabled it, you've dismantled it, because you've been able to kind of parent yourself. So that's an incredible teaching, I feel.
Yes. Yeah. And that actually brings up another perspective I'd like to get from you. So I can definitely attest to that in my own personal experience navigating all this. There was a good period for, I would say, at least 7 to 8 days. I was spelunking into the bottomless rabbit holes, like I was in it. I like put off a lot of the other things in my life, even making money, when I really needed to actually focus on that. And that's just where my energy was going. And I knew that I was going through some kind of process, and I just need to allow myself to do that, and that's fine. However, there was a point where I realized that I had gone far down. It became disproportionate with my actual life, what's actually going on in my immediate reality, and I needed to make a strong pivot to get back to balance and actually to start helping people, because that's ultimately what I realized. Like, I need to shift my energy so I can help people get centered and get grounded in whatever way I can be of service at the moment. And shortly after that, I noticed I woke up one morning and this kind of density and heaviness that was on me just felt like it lifted. It just spontaneously lifted. This was about 8 days ago or so. And it breathed a new sense of life into me, a new sense of motivation, clarity, drive, even kind of this physical energy, mental focus. And I felt like I was sober all of a sudden, from this end, the left or the right, or this agenda, this story, that story. I just felt very centered. And so that's just a personal experience. I'm curious how many people out there have had a similar experience of feeling this just enliftment, just this lifting happen, not based on us necessarily enforcing it, because that just creates more density, right? When we try to force our way through something that's happening one way or another. It was like grace. It's that thing you speak about in that particular audio that you have, that meditation audio, that's all on grace. It was that exact experience, except it wasn't just me seeing a bird flickering in the wind and having a moment. It was a physical and existential experience that has not stopped. And so I think I'm bringing that up to get to this little point in the conversation, which is my experience and many other people's experience, is that we are being thrusted into an integration process with our highest self. That's one way I'm kind of phrasing it. Our virtues are the things that we truly value. In other words, our priorities. And for some of us, that's leadership, right? That's really stepping out on the front lines and providing a voice and leadership and guidance, and going against the consensus norm in a lot of cases, and what's being projected and pushed out there, and creating a lot of fear and pandemic in people's minds, really kind of like going against that narrative and trying to bring a new narrative to the collective. And so I guess my question with that said is that, this balance between like the way that I experience Richard, it's like a ferocious, fierce, like warrior like energy. It's like being on the front lines of a battle, right? That's sometimes how I experience it. But then there's also tempering it with compassion, right? This kind of like oscillation. So it's not just pure, getting into this craze or anything, but there's like what are your thoughts and feelings for people such as myself that are feeling that warrior energy coming alive, but also, having the sense of grace and compassion coupled with it?
Yeah, I think you said it really well, Ronnie. It's I've written an article about thriving in turbulent times, and it's in that article, one of the things I say at the end is it's like there's this figure of the dervish, the dervish, the whirling dervishes from Turkey. And the dervish is this kind of ecstatic warrior. And the dervish kind of the dervish comes alive in times of crisis, right? So that we each have this character inside us, this dervish, this being that can respond to crisis creatively. Instead of, being the one that kind of contracts, the dervish expands when chaos comes. You know, they're the ones that go out to meet the whirlwind, if you know what I mean. So the whirlwind comes, and instead of like withdrawing indoors, they go out into it and they open and they expand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, and of course, the dervish spins. You know, that's their thing. It's like they go into the spin and they surrender to the spin of what appears to be chaos.
Right.
And then in the spin, they find the center, and they remain absolutely crystal clear and calm. And so I think you're right. Like, this is a great time for people not to contract overly, you know, but to gently expand in a creative way. How can we respond to this creatively? Because many of us, for instance, are dealing with very real concerns and fears about livelihood, and, you know, how we're going to make our income so that we can support ourselves and our families, you know, in the next, you know, years ahead. And, you know, so there are many ways that we can actually reinvent ourselves. And, you know, like you said, like, you can respond creatively, and then you feel empowered rather than disempowered. Right. You know, you're no longer a victim. There's always some edge you can find. There's some place that you can reinvent some aspect of yourself, something that's been like, you know, you've shelved it for a long time. And you could bring those parts alive again, or learn new skills, and, you know, and make the most of this time in a way. I mean, I've already been saying that, you know, when this time comes to an end, which it will, then we'll look back on it, and we'll, you know, you're either going to say, well, you know, I weathered that okay, or you're going to say, well, that was the time I came alive. That was the time that I learned this, and I did this, and I was reborn, you know, and a whole new thing came out of me. So that's the potential for this time for anyone. If you can be the dervish, if you can step into the storm instead of caving into the fear, and there's a lot of fear out there, obviously, and you know, and I'm not, you know, those in fear need, you know, they need to be kind of very gently held, you know, and kind of given that kind of gentle leadership in a way. And so I think that many people who are watching this probably already have learned the skills to help those who are less fortunate, or who have more fear in their system. And so there's a responsibility in us, in a way, to kind of rise up and help those more in need, you know, and that's a great use of this time of our energy.
That's very well put, and that's exactly how I and many other people feel. I'm sure, obviously, you're the one sharing that. I'm sure you have felt. I don't want to say feel as if this is the only instance. You're a little further ahead of me in this particular incarnation. So I assume, and I know that even with a work like the Gene Keys coming through, I would assume that was an evolutionary pulse or catalyst, right? From whatever spawned and triggered that, right? I've had many things in my life that have triggered awakenings and triggered creativity and triggered the producing of some great form of art. But a lot of those came from pain. A lot of those came from, you know, that the sacred wound, right? Where the light comes in, right? That I think that's a very valuable insight right now for a lot of us. And you brought this up, and I just want to reiterate this thing about trauma is so important, because that's exactly what I see when I go on Facebook and I see the extraordinary amount of bipolar behavior, or I should say bipartisan type of behavior is a more accurate word, right? The politicalizing of something that has really very little to do with politics, although that is part of, let's just say, an agenda or part of a show. You use the word theater, so I think that's an appropriate way to describe that whole thing, right? It's a show, it's a theater, it's cameras, lights, action, and who knows where that's going, other than just getting your attention, right? Just trying to get your attention, keep your attention. You know, it's the same old thing, right? So right now I think we're being given the opportunity to feel our way through uncertainty versus versus trying to watch a show or watch other people try to give us direction, give us their little thing, because they don't know. No one knows. No one knows exactly where this is going. It's an individual feel your way through. And I like, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there, but I really like how you said this is an opportunity, because that's exactly how I feel, Richard. I feel like this is the opportunity. This is the thing that so many people looked forward to when they thought of 2012. And Terrence McKenna talked about 2012 and the time wave zero and all that. And I feel like this is exactly what he was talking about. And maybe, I don't know if it's of interest to you in this moment, in your particular perspective. Not that I want to talk about 2012 per se, but you know what I'm talking about. You know, the whole spiritual community and the whole anticipation up to that. And I'm curious, based on what I'm saying and the parallel between 2012 and now, what we're literally experiencing, and in the shift that most likely did actually occur in 2012, but it didn't happen in a way that like arrested our attention like this is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you you know, the system I use, Gene Keys, it's incredibly accurate in terms of, and it's one of the most sophisticated, you know, tracking systems. It's a little bit similar to some of the Mayan systems because it's based on the 64 matrix. And the 64 matrix, of course, is the genetic matrix, which has 64, you know, codons. And we also see it in many different places in nature. So we see it through the 8 octaves of musical scale. We see it in architecture. We see it in the architecture of life, the phi ratio. In many places, we see the 64-fold geometry. And so it's a really accurate way. Obviously, it's caught from the Chinese I Ching. And Gene Keys is based on that 64 matrix. And so when you track these big universal patterns through this matrix, you can see like the patterns shifting in these decades, like particularly in 1987, you know, which the Mayans called the harmonic convergence. That was the first of 3 gear shifts in this period. And, you know, the second one was 2012, as you said, and that was the kind of mid one, which I call melodic resonance. So you had a harmonic convergence, melodic resonance, and then the third one is in 2027, 7 years from now. And that one's, I call that rhythmic symphony. And so these 3, harmony, melody, rhythm, you know, you have 3 kind of incredible shifts in the basic architecture of being, of life on our planet. And, you know, it never happens. They're all one shift in a way, but they're just kind of triggers in the process. And it very rarely happens that at that date anything occurs, right? Because they're markers. They're markers in evolutionary scale. They're markers inside us, genetic markers in a way, at an evolutionary level, because there are shifts that occur over these time periods. And in a way now we're kind of moving into this last cycle towards the 2027 shift. And it's the end of a kind of cycle that began, I think it was 256 years ago with the discovery of Pluto. I think, no, that's not correct. But it is to do with the transit of the planet Pluto, which takes 256 years. That's what it is, to go around the sun. But it is very much connected to these long-term transits of outer planets and the rhythms that they represent in consciousness. And so we're approaching a kind of doorway, a portal, and we're kind of, by the time you get to that date 2027, that kind of, there's a door that's closed in a way. And that means that a lot of the old material on the planet, the old genetic material, the old ways, the old structures, then begin their kind of process of kind of decline, you know. And so we're really going to see a change, I would say, from that period. And in the next 7 years, we're going to see the kind of an unraveling, you know, would say, of some stitching, you know, that has held up our society for a long time. And that's going to be frightening, you know, for many of us, because the things that we hold dear, that we've kind of got used to, slowly, one by one, are kind of starting to kind of, you know, it'll be gradual in the beginning, and then probably pick up pace, I imagine. So, you know, what we're seeing now is just the beginning of that process. And I think it's important to kind of just be really anchored and be calm and be prepared. And you know, you don't have to go out and sort of buy a bunker or anything like that. It's more, it's instead of building a bunker, build community. That's really what's important, is find your people that you really connect with and build bridges in your community to those people.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of us are going to have to contemplate seriously, you know, our lifestyle, and like because you know, the patterns that hold us up are so flimsy. You know, these supply chains that we are reliant on are so delicate that we take them for granted, but you know, they're not going to last forever, and because it's not sustainable. So I think it's going to be really interesting as we contemplate more how, you know, what is it I need to do in my life? What do I need to change in order to kind of find that sustainability, you know, to find that support around me, so that we begin to live more lightly.
Yeah.
You know, we begin to live in a simpler way. I think those are really important questions. And as you know, probably like a big part of Gene Keys and my teaching is called the art of contemplation. You know, that we have to very carefully consider things, take our time. We mustn't react too quickly. When you react quickly out of fear or anger or whatever it is, you tend to make bad decisions. So when we pause, when we give space, when we contemplate things over time, things come clear. And, you know, the more and more lucid we become, the more, you know, we make calm decisions, and they're usually the right decisions. So I think, you know, more and more people are going to kind of find that view really interesting, and in terms of, and very practical, like, what do I do now? What do I do next? We don't need to rush out and do anything. We don't need to right now. Like, there's a lot of panic on the internet. Like, yeah, maybe I can make lots of money now. You know,
Totally.
Like just get everyone calm down. You know, like, use this time to go within, because that's the most beautiful, powerful thing. Because this is what our next phase of evolution is about, going within, and we need to find these pathways inwards so that we find these deep wells of calm and lucidity. And out of that, we can make the right decisions, you know, as we go ahead, whatever comes our way. So I think in a way that's what the real gift is in these times.
Yeah. I completely agree. And that's also the real challenge for many nervous systems that have been entrained with you know, with fear reactivity and stress and anxiousness and paranoia. I mean, prior to this ever happening, there were plenty of paranoid ideologies and stuff spreading throughout the matrix. So this is just such a prime, it's like an amplification and a triggering, and I would love to get if you have any particular practices, and I also want to, this is like a two built-in question. Any particular practices that you use or that you can recommend people to soothe their nervous system, to soothe if a trauma or a pain point or a stress fracture starts to arise? You know, because it's one thing to listen to the interview, but when that thing arises, it critical thinking and logic and all that great stuff, it's all of a sudden that goes out the door. And sometimes it can be like a panic or an uncertainty. It can feel like the world's coming to an end, even though everything is as it was moments before, right? So there's that of like what somebody can do to breathe in and soothe the nervous system so they can process that trigger or whatever. And then also with that said, is I know we're coming to the cap off of the interview. With that said, how can somebody also use the gene keys within this time? I'll just complete the question on that note.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Well, if it's like a kind of one of those emergency moments, yeah, where things really get on top of you in terms of anxiety, the thing that I would recommend is like it's to take your hands, both your palms, and place them on your belly. You know, it's the belly is the place, it's the kind of cauldron, you know, where the alchemy takes place in our body. And it's also, you know, the solar plexus is the place where, you know, it's the source of who we are in there. And for many people, it's a difficult area of the body where there's a stress. So when you place your palms on your belly and you just gently, maybe you can like move them gently in a circle, or you can just hold them there. It's like your mother holding your tummy, you know, it's like your mother reminding you that you're safe. And you just breathe gently into your palms, and you begin to, you know, you can, like I said, you can circle gently. Sometimes that feeling of touch can be very deeply reassuring. If you do that for like 10, 15 minutes, probably your breathing will start to kind of drop deeper, because it'll come down into your belly, even unconsciously, without you kind of knowing. And then you'll start to kind of feel more yourself again, and the panic will subside. And there are other things you can do as well, like at the same time you could put on some music that you really love, or you could listen to a speaker who makes you feel very reassured, or those kind of things. And I, by the way, provide all kinds of reassuring resources on Gene Keys, and I've done a whole load of free stuff on YouTube. And I really make an effort, and it's not an effort, but it's for me, but it's like I really put a lot of reassuring things out there. And some of my stuff is set to music as well. So I do these meditations and these journeys that really kind of remind you that all is well, even if it seems not. And so the combination of doing those kind of things can be really reassuring and softening, because you're remembering to be gentle with yourself. Again, this is just that reminder, like, be gentle with yourself, like, and by touching yourself and on your belly, like, it's really reconnecting with the source of who you are. Mm-hmm. And I've got you know, so I really, if anyone's interested to know more about my work, then my YouTube channel has loads of really nice things, Gene Keys. And also on my website, I think you've got a link you might post, like free resources for turbulent times. And I put out this meditation on the equinox that was really popular, and it's had like maybe 25,000 views. And it's an audio meditation set to haunting music. It's a journey. It's about 40 minutes, and it takes you into the background of this time, right? And it takes you through this kind of journey of what it's really all about, but not going. It's more mythic. So it soothes the unconscious. It answers the right brain, the holistic view, rather than like worrying about the details and of what, you know. It just takes you into the kind of what's behind this time, you know, and so many people have found that very useful. And of course, you know, the other thing I'd say, like, if people click on that link to Turbulent Times and scan down, there's all these resources. You know, we're a global community working with the Gene Keys, and we're all around the world, and there are thousands and thousands of us, and we're working deeply with this material, personal transformation, group transformation. We're very supportive. We speak lots of different languages, and we're very rich, kind of loving community who are doing these programs together to unpack some of the trauma and to support each other in that process of transmutation, and also offering each other, you know, kind of friendship and you know, that kind support. And it you know, and there, you know, so I put out a lot of stuff, as you know, Ronnie. Like, I have a newsletter that's every week that kind of details. This is the theme of the week, and based on the kind of the patterns of the 64 and what's moving through this week. And then I put out all these resources. So I'm like fairly prolific in that sense of just offering techniques and a voice of like, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. I mean, that was what, it's strange being the carrier of that, but for me, this all began in 1996, and I had this deep mystical experience, as you probably know, and for 3 days I was in this light field of like expanded transcendental consciousness, and out of that came the gene keys eventually. But in that state, I kind of just had this, it's like the difference between being awake and asleep. Once you've woken up in that sense, you would never go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And this part of me has ever since then had this cellular certainty. I know where we're going. I know it. I know it in every cell of my being. And so when I speak to people, I come from that place of like knowing.
Yeah.
And you have to find your own knowing. But like sometimes when you hear it from someone else who really resonates with it, then it can be a reminder and a trigger that all will be well. All is well. And even though, I don't know how we're going to make this transition, the how I've not been shown, but I have been shown the what, it's happening. It will happen. It is destined. And so, but I can't prove that. I just know it. I don't need to prove it.
Right.
So I encourage people to remember that for themselves, because I feel that each one of us has that place inside us where we know that this is all divinely orchestrated. We've been here before. We've done this before. There's a place in our consciousness when we expand broadly enough. If we can expand to that very high place, we actually remember beyond the form. It's like we remember. And so we no longer fear death because we know it's an illusion. And therefore we can sit as a witness to the theater as it unfolds with all its horrors and ecstasies, and we can hold all of that, and we can be strong with all of that, and we can offer solace when we need to, and we can offer support and kindness and to ourselves and others. And that's what we need to do now, really, just to be centered. So
that's been my sense this whole time. And I feel like in the grand scale of what you're talking about, and also what other people are talking about, whichever narrative or particular perspective you may choose to narrativize, or let's say illustrate the storyline of what may be unfolding, because there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of narratives, there's a lot of information. So it's kind of choose your own perceptual adventure kind of thing going on. And I just really, the sense of centeredness, centricity was the thing that really came up strongly for me. Like, I want to be an advocate for centricity, remaining centered within your being. And you mentioned knowing, and that's a very interesting thing to say, because that has been the spontaneous evolution of my own sense of whatever I've been reinventing myself into, or what's been reinventing through me. It's definitely a sense of knowing. It's not a sense of thinking or conjecture or hypothesizing about, trying to soothe my uncertainty with some idea, or like, projecting some fantasy in the future of like, oh, it's all just white light and God's coming down to save us, or the ETs or something. And so I feel better. It's not that I feel better or not. It's actually uncomfortable some days, because the knowing forces me into action that otherwise I may not have taken. So it's an interesting dynamic, and it's an interesting experience to be in that knowing, like you said, because that knowing comes from the center. It comes from my solar plexus. It's not up here. It's not a phantasm of my mind trying to make myself feel better because I don't know what's going on. It's this sense of like, I get the theme, I get the mythic cord of remembrance, as Michael Beckwith has said. Like, and that's the last thing I just want to mention. Just as you said, like, there's a mythic perspective. This is mythological. This is not logical. This has been done before, and it's in our DNA, and it's all coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, at a mythic level, we're in a romance. We're in a grand romance at some mythic level. And what story that we resonate most with stories of redemption and atonement. That's what that is, the human resonance, the chief resonance. It's why all our movies, or 90% of our movies and films and books have that. And if they don't have that, we feel kind of cheated.
That's so true. It's so true.
And because that is deeply embedded in our DNA, it's not just hope. That is who we are. That is what the universe is. Universe is a kind and compassionate universe. It does push us through some horrendous experiences, but it gives us at the end this atonement, this redemption. And that's why all our myths and our storylines contain that redemption, all the really great ones, and because that's where we're going. That's who we are, so yeah, right. It's not a made up mental thing. It is a responsibility, knowing, remembering, because then you're like, oh God,
jeez,
how am I going to live now? People, how will people, how I can't hide it, and some people will react to it, and but you have to live your truth.
Yeah, beautifully put, and just a beautiful bow to tie on this. And that one thing right there is just so important, reclamation, atonement, these ideas, like the falling from grace and the rising from the ashes. And this is something, Nick, I can't remember if we went into this in our interview, the three of us, you, me, and Nick Good. I'm sure we did. He's talked about it many times. It's something that I've really felt the mystic thread of in my being, whether it's from a movie or just my own life experience, this fall from grace and judging myself every step of the way down and smacking on the ground, and all the life, or all the energy coming out of my body, laying there staring up into the sky, and then also feeling the grace come through me once I've been emptied out of, so to speak, and then rising from the ashes as a reborn me. This is something all of us, I think, is part and parcel to the human experience. In that sense of, and maybe just kind of the last thing, as I said all that, is I'm going to tie it back down to the compassion thing. And so there's also this self-judgment component as we're falling or making a certain descent. There can be a lot of self-judgment and self-criticism coming up, especially for me. And I'll just give you a very quick example. When this all happened, I had a little bit of self-criticism, which was like, you didn't prepare for this. You've been hearing that there's going to be an economic crash. You've been hearing for years. You've known this actually in your belly, that this is inevitable, but I squandered my time here or there. I didn't take it seriously, whatever the thing was. And now we're here. We're not in a great situation. However, so I felt that, right? I felt all that. Now, luckily, I didn't sit with it. I went down the rabbit hole for 8 days to medicate myself, perhaps. And then once I came out of that, I felt the feeling of grace, got into action, turned the whole boat around, and then brought myself and my immediate family back into a sense of stability. But I felt that experience, and I can only imagine that there's a lot of other people that may be feeling that a little bit more intensely.
Yeah. Well, the universe is quite compassionate in some respect, because it's actually giving us, a chance to get it right, and so that's a great learning that you've just shared, and for many of us, because the next time the next hit comes, we need to be more ready. And so we can use this time as preparation for that. And I think we should, that's why I said, like, contemplate carefully your lifestyle, how you're going to, you don't need to react. You don't need to like hide yourself away somewhere. You just need, the most important thing is to connect with others, to connect, to build community, to build these like friendship connections so we get support around us. And then the clearer decisions will come from this kind of diamond self that we have inside us, but that requires that we go inside regularly in order that we can connect to that inner light and not be too distracted by the many kind of crazy opinions and views and machinations and things that are going on out there right now, because that's just the mass kind of anxiety manifesting through all its different storylines. What if this, what if this, what if that, what if it was these people, what if these people are doing that, what if this, all that kind of mania and those stories. And that's not the real story. The real story is deep inside us. If we can find that inner light, it doesn't matter what's going on out there. It doesn't matter. We know exactly how to respond to it from this inner light. So that, I guess that's my kind of my most important thing is like really to use this time to go inward and find that place of inner light, so that we can, out of that, serve ourselves and serve those around us.
That's extremely beautifully put. And that just, and it's like, it may seem voluntary. It may seem like a voluntary thing, like, oh, I'm going to choose to do exactly what he's talking about. But I just want to suggest that there is a collective COVID ayahuasca ceremony going on in the world right now. And some of us got the first wave. Maybe the medicine was a little more fast acting in some people than others, but I just suspect that this is going to make its rounds. And so this isn't necessarily something that you even have to choose. It's something you have to feel into, in other words, to allow, right? And I think that's part of your work too, is like, there's this piece about allowance, like we've permissioned the world that we live in. Nobody did it to us. We're not victims. We've all collectively permissioned through many different ways our lifestyle and the greater lifestyle of the world and the things that maybe we have sought as problems. So now we get to re-permission something else, but it does take some kind of medicine ceremony, however you want to interpret that, for a healing to happen or a bridge to be crossed from one stage of the game to another.
Yeah, I think I think we use, whatever kind of techniques and means that our spirit feels drawn to. And, for instance, that has not been part of my path, ayahuasca. And I haven't, it just hasn't been part of my path. What do I need to say more than that?
Yeah.
My path has been really being a family man, being a father.
That sounds like sounds like
and a householder
equivalent.
And a husband. And those traditional models for me have been my edge. They have given me the kind of the integration that I need to kind of test my mettle, in life. And so there's many different ways to find that diamond light inside. And whichever way, kind of, usually the way that's come to you is the best way. It's the way that's there. It's naturally. So I trust in what life delivers.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And ayahuasca has definitely been something that has come to me, and it's also something that I've also integrated as well. And it's
powerful.
And it's my own part of my shamanic journey, but I'm 34 going on 55. So I got a little bit of a road ahead of me, and I appreciate what you just said. It's really like letting life be and that was the point. Like, life is the medicine, and we're going through some form of a medicine ritual, ceremony, initiation, and to allow it. And I'm speaking to myself, by the way, whoever's listening. I'm literally looking at myself right now in the camera. Like, I'm speaking to myself just as much as I might be to any of you. And I just want to say, Well, I just want to say thank you to you, Richard. Like, really, just gratitude and graciousness. Yeah, you're just one of those individuals, I feel, and I've had enough interactions with you. This is the fourth time we're doing this, so I've gotten to feel your heart and your embodiment and your sense of stability, and also your softness as well, which is a unique combination, particularly in the masculine template of our world, to connect with another individual who really embodies this masculine stability, but is also very soft and gentle and patient. And I think these are the qualities that really are defining our time, or defining like what the appropriate response is right now. So I just want to thank you for continuing to be that role model and bringing the Gene Keys to all of our awareness. And so with that said, I shared that turbulence link in my Facebook comments for everyone live, everybody in YouTube. That's in the comments podcast. It's in the show notes. Richard, is there anything else you'd like to share, or?
I think that's great for now. I think
Okay.
just keep it to one thing. So in there, there's an invitation to explore further, and whichever way you feel drawn. So, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ronnie. It's been really lovely talking to you again. Mm-hmm. Likewise, nice feeling your heart as well, and that you're kind of firmly on your path, and you're a humble man, and I really appreciate that as well. Mm. It's like you're really willing to like own, you know, the mistakes you've made, and like kind of pull yourself up and move on. And yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, the feeling is mutual. I appreciate that more and more these days. So thanks. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for joining us once again. Just an incredible opportunity, incredible conversation. I really, really hope and suspect that it supported you wherever you are in this exact moment, moving on to the next. And that's it for me. So blessings and aloha to everyone out there. And please check that link out for resources for a turbulent time, so you have what you need to maintain the right perspective for you to stay stable, centered, and in balance. All right, much love and aloha.